Tara Bruley with BePreparedPeriod.com, here to share with you another tip to help you have a better period. And today's tip, I would say, is specifically designed to go out to all the young girls out there, tweens, teens, and of course their parents. Today's tip is about toxic shock syndrome, and it is to know the true risk of toxic shock syndrome and its symptoms. Before my life in the menstrual business, I'm almost embarrassed to say that my toxic shock syndrome education or knowledge was very limited. The information that I got as a young girl really only came from my mom, and that was after she found that I was stealing her tampons. And the information she gave me was that you can get toxic shock syndrome. Basically, it was something that made you sick. And you could get it from wearing your tampons too long, so obviously to avoid that. And really her impression, or the impression that I got, was that it was a very rare thing and not to really be too concerned about it. And I would say that fortunately for me, I was a lucky one. I used and probably abused tampons for over a decade before switching to healthier options. And I didn't really experience, at least to my memory, any negative effects due to my tampon usage. My true knowledge of toxic shock syndrome actually started when a company that I work with sent me an email about a lady named Lisa Ellifritz, and it told a brief story of her losing her daughter Amy to toxic shock syndrome. And through that, it was really a touching story, and after that I reached out to the organization to see if there was anything that I could do in the work that I was doing to better support the mission that they were on and to raise awareness for toxic shock syndrome. So in reaching out to Lisa Ellifritz, I learned of the organization, the nonprofit that she was starting called youareloved.org, and through that work she wanted to educate other parents, other girls, to make sure that what happened to her daughter didn't happen to anyone else. And so through the support of their organization and the work that we continue to do together, I kept being introduced repeatedly to story after story after story of girls experiencing toxic shock syndrome. A lot of the stories coming from loved ones, from girls that didn't make it through toxic shock syndrome, and then some that were lucky enough to have survived toxic shock syndrome, but with pretty seriously lasting effects. And so through listening to those stories is really what started to hit home when I started thinking about how lucky I was and how I could relate as a young girl to all of these stories and how any of those stories could have been mine. In my working with You Are Loved, I learned that not only was I extremely lucky for the fact that I probably didn't use tampons in the safest way, but also that girls of teenage years, even through early 20s, are at an increased risk of toxic shock syndrome. And then I started thinking, as a mom, that's just not a risk that I'm okay with. And it just really fueled me with a desire to help other parents. Already being in the business of helping parents prepare girls for their periods, it just seemed like a natural part of that education to me, was to help spread that awareness. A big part of raising toxic shock syndrome awareness is knowing what the symptoms are. And a lot of the symptoms by themselves aren't necessarily something too alarming. You might think that they're the flu. And that's why it's important to know and realize, okay, I'm on my period, I am using a tampon, and could this be toxic shock syndrome? And to not dismiss it immediately as the flu, because for a lot of girls that have gone to the doctor with toxic shock syndrome, it can be too late because it's something that happens and spreads throughout your body rather quickly. So knowing the symptoms are extremely important. The symptoms include sore throat, aching muscles, high temperature over 102 degrees Fahrenheit, vomiting, headache, watery diarrhea, a red rash, confusion, dizziness, and very low blood pressure. And it's important to note that only 1 or 2 symptoms may occur, and they don't necessarily occur all at once, and they may not persist. So then the next question is, what should you do if you are having these symptoms? The first step is remove the tampon and save it if possible. It's important to be able to bring that to your doctor. They can even test that. The second step is seeking immediate medical attention. And then for sure, when you get there, inform the doctor that you have been using tampons, and even take a toxic shock syndrome information leaflet with you would be helpful. A list of these symptoms can also be found at bepreparedperiod.com, where we have a section all about toxic shock syndrome, and it even includes a personal story of mine. I also encourage you to check out the youareloved.org organization for a library of different stories, which I really encourage you to check out. It made a huge change in my life, and I'm sure that it will be worth your time to check out. And I know that today's video is a little bit of doom and gloom, but there is a bright side in that not all products, as I've said before, are created equally. If you do want to use tampons, there are tampons that have had no correlation to toxic shock syndrome. If you find organic cotton tampons, those have had no history of reported cases, as well as menstrual cups. So as far as internal options go, organic tampons, organic cotton tampons, as well as menstrual cups are safer options. So I hope you found today's video helpful, and until next time, I wish you a better period.